Okay. All right.
Have you ever heard of snow blowing?
Yes. Come on over. Well, let's go ahead and start. Welcome everyone this morning. I really appreciate you all being here. Robert Tucker, I particularly appreciate you being here because it is 5 o'clock in the morning out there in California. I'm not going to read Robert's bio. You can read about that in the announcement. But I do want to talk about a couple of things. First off, Robert has just released his new book, Build a Better Future. So I'm shamelessly going to promote your book. It's fantastic. Pick it up. You can see I've been reading it. There's all these tabs here. And Robert and I have been in this business probably both about 45 years or so. And we've been aware of each other's work for probably at least a couple of decades. But we've kind of been like passing in the night, right, Robert?
Right.
And recently, I did one of my blogs, and Robert's on the list. He responded. And it's like, why have we not connected? And I've been meaning to do this for a year or so. So we connected. Uh, our first conversation, we just couldn't stop talking because we're kindred souls in this business. And so I asked him if he would be so kind as to present to Buffalo Society for Creativity and Medical Education. And I want to thank you all for being here this morning. Robert, thank you particularly for you being here so early. Also, thank you for all the work that you've done over the years and really kind of for leading the future. And your work is really now focusing on some different aspects of innovation. And I'm going to let you talk about that right now. So, Robert, the hour is yours. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Tucker, round of applause.
Hey, all right.
All right.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can, Robert.
Terrific. Okay, well, that's a great start. And wow, it's what a pleasure to be speaking to all of you, BSCME, on this very cold day and very dark day out here in California so far. And I want to say anything for my buddy Roger because I am a great admirer of his works, his books, and all of the achievement that he has made with regard to helping companies to unleash their innovativeness and their creativity over the years. And I also want to say that Roger is a very a creative guy interpersonally. I mean, he called me the other day and he said, Robert, I got to ask you a very important question. He said, do you believe in free speech? And I said, well, of course, I'm a red-blooded American and all that. And he said, well, good, because I want you to give one. Well,
boy, I didn't see that coming, Robert. Well done.
And then he dropped the bombshell, that it's 5 a.m. in California that we would do the presentation. So I could not renege. So it's good to be with all of you. And
thank you, Robert.
Maybe it's just a little bit more about my backstory than all the propaganda there on the announcement. But no, I had a rather, unconventional background versus the distinguished medical professionals and doctors on this call. I really wanted to be a writer. That was kind of my big ambition there. And I got out of college, went to work in a series of dead-end jobs, and so I got promoted to Los Angeles. I was in selling college textbooks to professors, and the writing bug sort of bit. And fortunately, I got fired from that job. And I said, it's now or never. I'm gonna do it, or shut up about it. And so I went with that, and I've never really looked back because it was just a great unleashing of human agency and the kind of experiences that I've had over the years since then have just been very rewarding and very nourishing, if I can use that word. Essentially, what happened was I began interviewing and studying leading thinkers. The leading thinkers of that era, which would have been the early 80s, and people like Dr. Jonas Salk. I had the good fortune to fly and to interview him all for 5 hours, all the way from San Diego on a flight to LaGuardia. And Ilya Prigogine, the great Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and just many, many others. I mean, I lived in Los Angeles at the time, but I had no interest in celebrity interviews and profiles. I was always interested in, thinking about or learning from the leading visionaries and innovators of that era. And while I wasn't able to interview all of them, I think Steve Jobs turned me down, and Peter Drucker turned me down, and others. But wow, we could spend the whole hour just kind of reminiscing on that. But the upshot was that it was a very liberating experience. And then somebody asked me, well, what do these folks have in common? What are the traits of an innovator? And I said, well, let me think about that, and began interviewing even more of them, and wrote a book in 1986 called Winning the Innovation Game. Everything was winning back then, winning this and winning that. And it did pretty well. And it sort of launched me as a speaker. And, getting on the lecture trail was much more remunerative, if I can use that word. So 54 countries later, 8 books later, here I am, age 72, and still enjoying the thrill of the hunt, so to speak. So this morning, what I want to talk about is, as Roger said, my 8th book. Let me share here, and let's see. Right. Which has just come out, Build a Better Future, which is sort of my swan song, if you will, or probably my last book, but one never knows.
You never know, right?
You never know. So can you all see that slide there?
We got it, Robert. Yes.
All right. So this morning, we're going to talk about these 7 mindsets. And if I can just get it to advance here. Let's see here. How does that work? Okay. There we go. All right. So I'm going to crunch these down. Okay. So these are the 7 mindsets that I want to speak with you about. And the reason that we need to focus on the future is because it's arriving faster than ever before. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest to you all this morning that there will be more change over the next 10 years than there has been over the previous 100 years, perhaps even more than that, if you look at certain kinds of change, like political change. And my premise really is that we are simply not prepared for this rate of change. We've always had change, of course. I mean, the period between 1880 and 1915 was tremendously fast changing. You had the introduction of so many new technologies and so forth, the automobile, so much social change. People were moving from the rural areas into the cities and so forth and so on. But I think that those previous periods can pale in comparison to what we're going to be facing here and are facing really already. And so I want to look at how we can navigate this next 10 years as leaders, and especially those of you in the medical profession, which is ripe for change, even more change than it's already experiencing. So with that in mind, let's just dive in here. And for some reason, my slides don't want to advance in the normal way. Yeah, okay. All right, so the first one, let's get into that, is what I call the preparedness mindset. And this is, it's really a case of how do you prepare for eventualities that you really, in some cases, can't plan for. Now, I would argue that with the most recent, what we call polycrisis, the COVID-19 epidemic that killed over 20 million people worldwide and over 1 million people in the US. But, if you look back, I mean, Bill Gates was warning us that that the future was about not so much an errant missile, but an errant microbe that could bring us down. That's about 2015. So he sort of predicted that, and that's one of the things we want to get into as we look at how to prepare for the future, which is, what part of it is predictable and what part of it is just we have to kind of make it up on the fly here. And so in the book, we talk about a gentleman who was actually the chief strategy officer, Dr. Alex Smith, at a school district in North Carolina. And he was tasked with leading the crisis management team at his school district there in near Charlotte, North Carolina. And, for the first number of days, they were just kind of going around in circles without really having any kind of direction. And he did something, I think, very, very smart, and I think has to do with this sense of being prepared or having a preparedness mindset. He took a couple of days off to clear his head. It sounds simple, but realizing that you've got to find a new tool. And the tool that he just stumbled on was one that he had studied at Johns Hopkins, getting his doctorate. It's called a risk analysis index. And we won't go into the way he used it particularly, but I think the important thing there is that when he returned to his crisis management team, he had not only a new tool, but a new perspective on how to help. And so for the next little while there, they just threw every eventuality up on, what are you worried about? And threw that up on the whiteboard there. And then they used this tool to sort of segment it out and make a kind of determination about what was the most likely future to occur. And the point is that in a period of fast change like this, we do need to adopt new tools that are available. And we're going to talk about some of those tools today. But let's talk about this landscape just a little bit more. We mentioned more change in the next 10 years than the previous 10 years. We mentioned, or should mention, that we are going through a kind of strategic inflection point here. I would argue, and do in the book, that we're moving from the familiar agricultural, industrial age, information age. Now we're moving into this age of acceleration, where the rate of change will be more likely exponential, at least in terms of our technologies, rather than linear, which is what we've experienced in the past. And so the mindset here is that even on our darkest days, we need to remind ourselves to welcome change instead of trying to resist change. We need to remind ourselves to use it as a stepping stone and instead of a stumbling block. And we need to be willing to take on some new skill sets in this particular area. But linear change versus exponential change, this is an important concept. And if you'll look at the exponential lines there, they really continue to go up almost like a hockey stick. So this particular chart doesn't really do it justice in terms of what's happening. And then if you look down at those dots on the exponential chart, I would argue that we as a society are kind of somewhere up there. And so it's going to continue to create stress in our system. I think the incidents that are going on right now in Minneapolis, yes, that has to do with social and political changes, but I think in a more generalized sense, what's going on there shows the outpouring of just distress at too much change too rapidly in a direction that people are not comfortable with. Second would be the futurist mindset. We need to track change. We need to look for the signals of change in order to make smarter decisions. One of the people that I interviewed back in the day was a futurist by the name of John Nesbitt. Some of you may faintly remember that name. He wrote a book called Megatrends. And interviewing him and studying his work and his books, really kind of changed my trajectory, because his whole point was that by following the trends, by thinking about where they're going, you can make smarter decisions. And so I would rest my sort of benefit statement on why do some of the things we're talking about here is that you will make smarter decisions. Because all around us, I think we're seeing some really dumb decisions. And when you get into this realm of change and predicting change and so forth, you really begin to see how short-sighted some of our leadership is today. Everything from, let's just off the cuff, talk about how we're losing the auto industry in this country right now to mostly Chinese players, BYD and so forth. I think that in future years, Ford and Chevy will basically be just sort of niche players in the market. And you're seeing also even Tesla dropping like a stone because they have not navigated the future successfully. They took their eyes off the ball. So it does have bottom line implications. What is a futurist, though? I mean, I'm often asked this. People think it's like, do you have a crystal ball, or do you trade futures, pork bellies on the Chicago Exchange? No, and no, and no. It's a sort of unique profession in the sense that we really don't have a lot of, sort of dogma, or there's not a common theme to the pudding necessarily. But I think signal detection, pattern recognition, strategic foresight, those are the kind of things that sort of unite us. I love this quote from the futurist Gerd Leonhard. This is in the book as well. He said, "What I do is not prediction, it's observation, just paying attention. I can't tell you how many of my clients are not paying attention to what's happening. They don't listen to their kids or their wives, never mind the futurists, because they are so busy with the present." And so we see this time orientation, past, present, and future. And a good futurist, I think, must be a good historian as well, because we need that sort of perspective. And we'll talk a little more about that in the long view mindset. But what I want to recommend is that we make it our business to find the future. Find it first if we can. Here I am in Germany, in Berlin, I guess it is, at a museum on the future. Now, most museums have to do with a certain period of the past, or art from the past, or maybe even the present, but this is a museum, quote, devoted to the future. So boom, I told my travel mates, hey, I got to check this one out, and just to talk about this a little bit, I find the future emerging in airports because I pay attention. Maybe you're tempted to dive into your briefcase or into your phone or whatever, but I suggest being very proactive and eavesdropping on the people perhaps behind you if you still fly commercial. Probably some of you don't, but hey, no bitterness. It's amazing how many people I used to see, movers and shakers, I used to see in airports and during travel, and they've all gone to executive jets, I think, these days, because you just don't see them. But anyway, so those are just some of the kind of things that you can do. One of the big things that I'm known for is this notion of auditing our information diets. And we all have a caloric diet, and some of us try to lose weight, especially this time of year. And so we try to reduce that. But I want to talk about the inputs to your thinking process, to your futurist mode. And of course, magazines were my life in the early days, and throughout my career, I've subscribed to many, many magazines. And if you look at that as just one little zone there of change, wow, magazines are basically just like Hollywood and just like so many other industries today. They're upside down, but they were a tremendous source of learning and of trend watching. And I highly recommend that you take a really sharp look at your information diet. And in the book, we make a lot of suggestions about how to revolutionize your diet, because it's like the old computer expression, garbage in, garbage out. And I think so many times now today with information fracking and the search for, or they're trying to keep our eyeballs on whatever it is that we're writing about, but we're sort of lost our way here. And yeah, as one old timer journalist told me, Barry Farrell used to write for Life magazine. I'm really dating myself, but he said, Robert, serve the reader. And I've never forgotten about that. Serve the audience, serve the reader for their need to know. And so much of writing today is just worthless, and it's self-serving and narcissistic even, and it doesn't help us to get to the future first. So be aware of what you're reading, and perhaps even rearrange and upgrade your information diet would be my suggestion. In the book, we also talk about a new framework for managing change or for analyzing change. I think many of you on the call, perhaps especially those who are in strategic planning areas, will know about SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But in the book, we unveil a new framework called DITTO, and it stands for Direction, Implications, Threats, and Opportunities. And this is best done in groups. You can do it individually, but you take any trend, especially a trend that is in your purview, in your industry or profession. What is the direction of this trend? And you mind map that using some of Roger's creativity techniques. What are the implications? What are the threats? Who is threatened? What are the opportunities? That's probably the most important there, because Roger and I, in our work in innovation and creativity, are all about creating new opportunities for our clients. And then another question that I like to ask wherever I am and wherever I go is, where will this trend be in 10 years? So when I read this book, The Age of Extraction by Tim Wu, he served, I guess, in the Obama administration as an advisor, but he is writing about the concentration and the power of 5 or 6 of the tech companies. These tech platforms, he claims, have conquered the economy, and they're threatening our future prosperity. And so, yeah, with any trend, where is that trend going? And I think he makes an important point here about, how this is really rearranging our society. Number 3 is the adaptability mindset. I think we're probably all vaguely familiar, at least, with Charles Darwin's famous quote that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather it is the one that is most adaptable to change. And, the old adapt or die kind of perspective comes to mind here, because that is truly the case in this new environment. And perhaps Roger as well, but I have spent much of my career working with companies that were being disrupted by social trend or economic trend or technological trend. The variety of trends coming at them, untoward trends, I would say, and their response or lack of response to those trends was what was so revealing to me. And just like you as a doctor, seeing a certain condition in so many different patients, I would in effect see how different patients or clients in this case responded or failed to respond to those changes. And I think the biggest thing, as we were just talking, is identifying what is the change, playing with the clay. What are the implications here? Worked with Nokia in about 2006. They had their high potential manager meeting in Palo Alto, California. It was quite an honor, because at that time, Nokia was number 6 or 7 on the Business Week list of most innovative companies in the world. And so for them to call upon me to give them a presentation or seminar on innovation was quite an honor. And so I did a little survey in advance and found that wow, this doesn't feel like the most innovative company in the world when you really get down to it. And I'll never forget in the conference itself in Palo Alto, I happened to ask the group, I said, if I work for you and I have an idea, what do you want me to do with it? And someone stood up and said, Mr. Tucker, I would just tell you to forget about it because in this company, you're just going to beat your head against the wall in frustration. And there were some quite, sort of untoward looks there, if you will, at this person. But I got the feeling that he was telling the truth about the culture because this survey that I had done in advance revealed that, we're risk averse, headquarters in Espoo, Finland, makes all the decisions. There's no interest in change or adapting or in innovation. And so, a couple of points there. Number one is the company that Roger and I experience when we go into these organizations is quite often different than what the public knows or even the business press has been writing about. It's a different reality. And so adaptability is going to be the most important mindset or one of the most important mindsets that we can adopt going forward here because we're going to be needing to adapt, to so much change. Organizations that are under the gun to adapt. And if you look around today, you see just organizations in various states of crisis mode because they're coping with too much change. And so it's all they can do to try to run the delivery engine, much less try to look ahead at the future or get creative about creating new opportunities or creating new value for their customers. And I think also each of us, in effect, has a delivery engine inside our brain and a discovery engine as well. And the discovery engine, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, because that has to do with our vision of life, our vision for the future, and that sort of thing. But just keep these two in mind. And in any organization, in any team or division of a company, these two forces are always at play. And because a delivery engine is in charge of getting product out the door, serving today's customers and so forth, they often have the most power. And they have the power to shut down the delivery engine and those who are associated with it if they want to, in many cases. I mean, I could tell you stories about, doing these wonderfully discovering kinds of interventions for an entire week with a company and then having certain senior managers come in to review our work and just throwing cold water on it and pretty much shutting it down. But, you have to couple that with just really exciting and sort of breakthrough kinds of meetings that we also hold that create tremendous new opportunities. Number 4, we've talked about the preparedness mindset. We've talked about the futures mindset in the adaptability mindset. But I want to talk about what's going on with human agency. Pew Research, which I think is among the finest, I mean, this is just a gem of research. So anytime they have something come out, I'm going to pay attention to what they're finding. And they, for whatever reason, about 3 years ago, they asked experts, people like yourselves, where do you think human agency will be in 10 years? It's, we should probably sort of define it a little bit here, but human agency back in the day, we should just simply call it motivation. Human agency is asking a person, do you feel like you control your destiny and you can take your career in life anywhere you want, or do you feel like the external forces are totally opposed to that? And if we think about it, quite honestly, if you're living in Russia, I have a good friend who immigrated out of Russia, and so we talk about Russia a lot when we get together. But he said, if you live in Russia, you don't even think about human agency. It's just so many people around the world, but the people on this call, this is something that we can think about and conjecture on where it's headed and how to unleash it, because I happen to have a bias there. And every day as I look at, various studies and the headlines and so forth. Okay, so let me just put a little bit of a finer point on that. So Pew asked experts, media labs directors and this and that, professors and other smart people, where is it going? And interestingly enough, 50% roughly of that survey, people felt like it was going to pretty much diminish over the next 10 years due to various forces. And I think one of those forces is just what's going on right now. And I'm sure that those of you who are doing this active trend watching that we're talking about are picking up on this affordability question. Now, it was sort of said to be, what took Joe Biden down, that and immigration, because he didn't handle it well, and now it's vexing the current president, Trump. But rising middle class anxiety is going to be a huge issue in the fall election. The affordability crisis. New polling reveals that voters see the middle class lifestyle drifting out of reach. Housing, home ownership becoming unattainable, according to 72%. Healthcare costs, right there in your area, 61%, and so forth and so on. And so what is the future of agency? Again, we want to talk about the path is not predetermined. Choices today shape tomorrow's agenda. And I also want to talk with you about the long view mindset, because I think the role of history in this next 10 years will be especially important to our sanity, to our ability to make good decisions. And so what is the long view mindset? Well, I sort of made it up. It's basically having to do with how we utilize history and our view of the past to inform the present and then to help us to plan for a better future. And so, well, let's just get into that a little bit here. I think what we're seeing right now is the need to prepare for simultaneous revolutions. History rarely experiences a single revolution in isolation, but even more so today, what we're seeing are, the AI revolution, of course, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's coupled with what's going on climatologically. And that's coupled with all of the social revolutions that are occurring today, including the MAGA revolution, if you will, and the geopolitical revolutions that are taking place almost in real time before our eyes. I mean, for the past 70 years, I think it is, we have had these institutions called NATO, called the UN, and so forth. And today, those are being jettisoned. So there's a tremendous amount of change that we're needing to navigate and to cope with at the very same time here. So coping with simultaneous revolutions is going to be part of our mix. And I think what we're also seeing is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier with respect to our information diet, but just the outbreak of lying, basically, and misinformation and even disinformation. There was just a report, I think, in the last 5 or 10 days about how the White House or somebody in the administration had been altering a video to make it look, the way they wanted it to come out. I don't think that there's very many recorded instances of that. I think that's a little bit new. And so in the book, we quote Hannah Arendt, and she says, this. She says, if everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. And I dare say that as we look over this next decade, if present trends continue, and they generally don't, but if present trends continue, I think we are in for an entirely different sort of social milieu. I mean, if you think back in our lifetimes, many of us can remember Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, right? And other examples of trust. But today, we're dealing with diminution of trust, of social trust. And so part of what I want to, my message with you today is that when you see a trend, then I want you to think about, okay, so how do I counter that trend in my own life, in my own realm, with my own people, and so forth, my own family. And so I think it has to do with trust. It's like we need to anticipate, hey, trust seems to be lacking in this environment. What can I do to restore trust or to build trust or to anticipate the need to build trust? I met at a conference here in Santa Barbara just last week for people who do what Roger and I do, consultants, speakers, authors, and so forth. And one of the authors had just written a book about trust in the workplace. And I'm thoroughly enjoying that book. And he's giving me so many techniques. But again, our pattern here, what we want to encourage is when you see a trend, especially a trend that doesn't seem to be going in a very positive direction, you want to figure out, okay, so how can I make that trend, I can turn that trend around, or at least make it work in my particular area. So this erosion of truth or trust can be turned around if we see the trend and then we figure out how to creatively respond to that trend in a positive direction. And I also want to include here a little bit about the anticipatory mindset. I mean, we could talk all day about this one, but I want to leave a little time for your comments and thoughts and observations, and if you have any questions. So this one is about becoming your own super forecaster. And if we think about this role that that futurists can play in our work, in our lives, and so forth, I think it really comes down to helping us to be better forecasters. Futurists can't predict. We don't have crystal balls, but we do have processes that can help us to forecast the future. So if you come upon a futurist or any other pundit who tells you this is exactly the way it's going to go, I think that you should push back there, because the complexity, even with AI helping us, is just daunting, and we can't predict. I mean, we could spend some time. Who could have predicted X and Y and Z and so forth? But if you use the techniques of super forecasters, and we have many of those techniques in the book, and we talk about that a lot, you will make better decisions because you will be in this anticipatory sort of frame of mind. And then the final one is the visionary mindset. And this is a favorite because many of those folks that I interviewed back in the day were visionaries. I mean, Dr. Jonas Salk, for example, had written a book about world population and human values, which was a big concern at that point. But I have studied the lives of so many of these visionaries and innovators and so forth. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Buckminster Fuller. And I'm sure we're all basically familiar with the man who created the geodesic dome. Turned out it wasn't such a great breakthrough in terms of a building structure. They tended to leak, as it turned out, but that was one of many of his inventions. And then later in life, he began lecturing and on the college circuit and really all over the world as more of a visionary, talking about concepts like demassification, which is like the reduction of, the amount of resources that it takes to do X and Y and Z. And certainly we've seen that trend and many, many others. But Bucky Fuller was visionary in the sense that he saw, I think, sort of our time here. And he said, it's going to be a cut and dried relay race right up to the end there as to whether we're headed toward, kind of a utopia or a dystopia. And similarly, I always talk about this notion that our future view, in some respects, determines our future. If we have a negative or dystopian vision, that one is liable to play out. But if we have a positive view of the future, and so one of the exercises that I would often do when I taught in the writers program at UCLA was to get people to my students. They were adults, and they were just people wanting to become writers, and I would have them write an essay about their life 10 years from now. And they loved it because, as one said, gosh, I've never really thought much beyond the weekend. And, I think that's true for all of us. We're so darn busy with the day-to-day, with the here and now, with the things to do list, that we don't stop and think about, where do I want to be in 10 years? So, the exercise was to cast them or to get them to do that. And boy, they would just have a field day with that. But that is just a technique, where do you want to be in 10 years? I remember back during that period, I was under the sway of a lot of these thinkers having to do with human motivation. We might call them motivational speakers, but they were philosophers. And they all believed in this kind of manifestation that we're talking about here in one way or the other. I remember, back in that period, just being so infused with endorphins or with enthusiasm, if you will, for the fact that, my human agency, that I could go anywhere and do anywhere and do anything that I wanted to do. And I dutifully, I remember one New Year's Day, I dutifully wrote down my goals, this is what I want to be doing in 10 years and this and that. And one of the things that I really, had in mind, and at this time, this was like early days in Los Angeles there, I was living in a very tiny apartment. The joke was that it was so small you had to go outside to change your mind. But I said, I want to be living in Santa Barbara. I want to be living in the hills of Santa Barbara. I want to have a view of the ocean. And lo and behold, I live in that house today and enjoy that. And so I do believe that dreams like that come true, and that there's power in thinking ahead of the curve like that. But back to this dystopian future or utopian future, Carl Sagan put it well when he said, I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few. And I think we're seeing that now with this age of extraction trend that's going on. So it's a balance. I attended a wonderful lecture last week here in Santa Barbara by a young man named Zach Cass, and he is the former go-to-market head of OpenAI up in Silicon Valley, and he has returned to live here in Santa Barbara. He's from here. I know his family a bit, and he filled the Granada Theater, which is one of our largest theaters here in town. And his approach is very optimistic. I would say, a very good speaker. And you might want to check out this book, The Next Renaissance. But he is actually predicting a new renaissance. So, Carl Sagan and a number of others really see that things are going to hit the fan here. And others see AI as bringing forth a new renaissance. My own feelings are that, yes, it will bring us many, many benefits, especially, for example, in medicine. We're going to see tremendous number of breakthroughs because of what AI can do in terms of discovery. But I think it will hasten other trends as well, that are not so positive. Unemployment, mass unemployment. McKinsey and some of the other people that really try to get quantitative on this are forecasting just huge numbers of job loss. Even last year, the Wall Street Journal reported tens of thousands of people will be displaced. So when we talk about this most disruptive decade in human history, we will see the good, the bad, and the ugly here. And it's our job to make sense of it and integrate these 7 mindsets in a way that help us to respond to it. So the preparedness mindset, where we're really, trying to help our organizations to be proactive. The futures mindset, where we're helping ourselves to develop new tools, such as scenario planning, adaptability. Are we lagging, like so many of these industries that I've studied? Like companies that were once riding high and are no longer. I mean, the end point on that Nokia story is that 1 year later, Apple introduced the iPhone, and Nokia began its spectacular fall from grace because they couldn't adapt fast enough, and they made some really bad decisions. Human agency, taking a historical, longer view there. And then finally, of course, the visionary mindset. So I'm going to leave you with that in terms of what I have to say. And we have a little bit of time here. By the way, here's a QR code if you want to check out our website, whatever's easiest for you. But I think I'm going to turn this off now. And let's see here. And I'm going to unshare the slides. How about that? Okay, so did that bring it back? No, that
Nope, not quite.
I'm still sharing there, right? All right.
But just go down to your share. Yeah.
Okay. All right, still sharing.
Robert, I think if you just go ahead and hit share, your unshare should come up.
There we go. Yeah, stop share.
There we go.
Sorry about
So,
that. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody
Robert,
have any comments, questions, thoughts?
so folks, now's your chance. Robert, thank you so much for this. Really fantastic. And so, questions, comments, Dr. Gatewood, I think it looks like you're ready to pose a question there.
First of all, that was an outstanding talk, Robert. I
Yes.
really, really enjoyed it.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I'm sure you're familiar with Thomas Friedman. And one of the books that he wrote, I absolutely love. It's called Thank You for Being Late.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And in that book, if you remember, there's a graph. And for those that haven't read it, it's about the time between 2007 and 2017 when there was, as Robert was talking about, this exponential growth in technology. And it started with the iPhone in 2007. And he shows a graph in there of, technology going up, increasing like this, as you pointed out, exponentially,
Hmm.
and our ability to adapt, sort of the linear line on
Right.
the and that's always, I've actually used that that slide in a number of talks that I've given. Uh,
Hmm.
but it really does resonate with me when I look at healthcare and education.
Hmm.
And I'm anxious to know how we can we can help that. Other than, I mean, I know for my students, when I teach medical students, and I encourage them every day to be agents of change, positive change. Um, and I, but other than that, I feel sort of helpless in changing that trajectory of adaptability and sort of adapting to the future in medicine and in education. And do you have any further advice on that?
Sure. Well, healthcare and education are two of probably the most important areas for us to look at how we're changing with change. How I'm getting a real interesting signal there, Roger. Are you hearing that?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Um, I was just reading in Zach Cass's book this morning, talking about healthcare and the number of advances that we're seeing. I mean, the genome and the CRISPR and all of that, but the administrative aspects of healthcare, just really super lagging behind. There's no innovation there. There's no improvement, and with regard to just speeding that up. And so I think the important thing there is that we and education, we could say the same thing, but that we, from a national perspective, we return to the questions of what is the best healthcare future. Right now we're just in such a lapsed state, at least at the national level. Our political leaders are just beside themselves, being whacked with so much change, and so much to cope with, right? It doesn't matter whether we're conservative or liberal. I think we can generally agree that just the amount of changes that they're dealing with. So they're not able to really be visionary whatsoever. So where will that change come from? Because we know that both in healthcare and education, it's an unsustainable state of affairs. It's not going to sustain over the next 10 years. Something will happen. Now, it may be a really nasty and a really negative and untoward kind of a thing, but it's going to change. And so if we use these kind of skill sets, I totally applaud you for sort of, in effect, deputizing your young folks there to become change agents and to think about these kinds of things. And I'm sure you probably know of where there are, green shoots occurring. And I'm sure that Roger would agree that one of the things you want to do is to find where the future is working, find where people are prototyping different models, and then we throw support to that. I did a huge assignment with the VA hospital system a number of years ago, and they were having an internal kind of fight that, between consolidate or sort of consolidating all their IT experimentation at the national level versus allowing the field, the local hospitals or whatever, to and so in preparing for that, I was looking for something that I could use to kind of encourage in this way. And I finally came upon this story of a nurse at the Topeka hospital, and she had been assigned to reduce medication errors and to try to get a handle on that. Mostly they wanted her to just do research into that, what's going on or whatever. But Sue Kinnick was a change agent, like you say. And so what she did was she didn't want to just describe the problem or do a report on the problem. She wanted to solve the problem. And so she's returning her rental car at the Seattle airport, SeaTac, and she sees how the guy there is using barcoding to keep track of cars, and she says, "Holy cow, we could use this!" And boom, this was one of the success stories where a big institution, that's slow to change, actually rose up, and they prototyped it on one floor. They prototyped it, they rolled it out, and barcoding, wow, had a great effect on reducing medication errors. Some nurse or somebody coming along and giving a certain medication or shot or whatever, and then somebody else repeating it and just screwing up, and so then they rolled it out to the entire VA system. Anyway, so when I told that story to this really sort of they were just caught up in frustration, and they just didn't see a way forward. I used that story to start that meeting, and I said, today we're going to call this, they'd called it Innovation Smackdown. It was in Charleston, South Carolina. I still remember it because we spent months planning this meeting to have everybody fly in, and it was a big deal for the government, big deal for the IT people. But I said, today we've called this Innovation Smackdown, but today this is Sue Kinnick Day, and I'm telling you, man, it just had a ripple effect. Oh yeah, I guess we could solve this problem, and we could work this out, and we could start communicating, and we could start collaborating. And it just, it was one of those success stories where a single story, I do believe, in retrospect, had a way of, oh yeah, we've done this in the past. There are people, that walk in our midst, a nurse in Topeka. And so, long-winded way of answering your question there, but I think that a grassroots kind of effort here is going to be what is going to effectuate change in the healthcare area.
Robert, thank you very much. It is at the hour right now. Do we have other questions or other things we want to handle? We'll take just another minute. We'll stay on until we've answered them. But any other items? Otherwise, we'll just call it a day here. So anything else for y'all? Okay. Robert, thank you so much for getting up
Pleasure.
so early. David will have this. We've recorded everything. Robert and David, you want to just stay on for just a second? The recording will be on my website. We've got applause here from Robert Gatewood. So thank you all for being here. Robert Tucker, thank you so much for getting up so early and spending the time with these folks. I think we sold a few books already here. By all means, and just wonderful. Thanks for your work, and thanks for being a colleague all of those years. And it's so nice to be connecting with you now, my friend. So thanks, Robert. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Great.